So welcome back to our channel. In today's video, we're going to be talking about fertilizer. We're going to cover the three main macro fertilizers known as NPK and how the plants utilize these nutrients.
Before we get started with these fertilizers, I wanted to mention that we have a video that's going to be coming out probably within the next month or so. We're working on it now, editing it out. This video is footage that we shot this past winter. We harvested 4 does in the late season. We hung them up using a mini excavator, and we tested 5 different popular broadheads to see which one performed best on penetration and if any of them had any kind of deflection. And I'll give you a little sneak peek on this. One of the broadheads actually penetrated through 3 of the deer and lodged into the chest cavity of the 4th deer. So stay tuned for this video. We're pretty excited about it, bringing this information to you. We think you'll find it pretty cool, and so be watching out for that.
So we wanted to let you guys know, to our first 1,500 subscribers, we're going to be doing a giveaway. Whoever the winner is will have the choice between either a nested backpack, which comes with a set of climbing sticks and a tree stand, or a top-of-the-line Reconyx trail camera. All you have to do to get entered to win is subscribe to our channel and email us a screenshot that shows that you're subscribed. And then whenever we're ready to hold the contest, we'll have a deer head on display and some trail camera pictures of it. And then you guys will get to estimate the score of the deer, and whoever's the closest will get to choose between the nested backpack or the top-of-the-line Reconyx trail camera.
So we don't claim to be experts on fertilizer or plant nutrition. This information that we're bringing to you in this video today, it's information that we acquired over years of planting food plots and also consulting with friends of ours that are farmers that are way more knowledgeable than we are on fertilizers. However, we think this will be very helpful for you guys out there that may not be exactly sure about how plants utilize the different nutrients in fertilizers and what they require. We've got some charts that we're going to share with you. These charts will help you understand better how a particular crop pulls certain nutrients out of the soil depending on the tonnage of that crop that is removed, and that will help you to understand better what is required of fertilizers to be put back into the ground as a maintenance application to continue health and growth of that particular crop.
So let's get started. NP and K, as they're known, N stands for nitrogen, P stands for phosphorus, and K is for potassium.
Plants require at least 14 mineral elements for their nutrition, which include the macronutrients nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, calcium, magnesium, and sulfur. And the micronutrients chlorine, boron, iron, manganese, copper, zinc, nickel, and molybdenum.
So now that we've covered all the 14 mineral elements that the plants require for their nutrition, we'll turn our attention to NP and K, which, as we noted, are the 3 main macronutrients.
So yeah, plants need large quantities of these 3 main macronutrients to flourish. As the name implies, micronutrients are also needed, but they're needed in much smaller quantities than the macronutrients.
So N, or nitrogen, is required for healthy green leafy growth. P, or phosphorus, is required for strong roots and fruit and flower production. K, which is potassium, is responsible for the overall plant health and disease prevention.
So I think most guys out there that are doing food plots are using dry fertilizers for the most part. There might be a couple outliers that are using liquid fertilizers, but dry fertilizers are easy to deal with and you don't need any kind of special application equipment. So in this video we're just going to be covering dry fertilizers, and mainly those fertilizers that are used in the farming community, ag fertilizers. And so a little side note on that, for some of you guys that are buying your fertilizer like at Home Depot or Garden Center or your farm store, if you have co-ops in your area, like if you live in a farming community, a lot of these farm co-ops will sell you ag fertilizer in bulk, and you can save a few bucks there. It's usually quite a bit cheaper than what you're going to go buy, at your garden center or a farm store. So just a little tip there might save you some money. Those guys sometimes they'll even bag it up for you. But yeah, check that out if you have that in your area.
Dry granular ag fertilizer. So when we're talking about nitrogen in the dry fertilizer form, it's normally urea. And urea is 46 units per 100 pounds. Phosphate or phosphorus is generally 18 units of nitrogen and 46 units of phosphorus per 100 pounds. Potash or potassium is 60 units per 100 pounds. So if we took 100 pounds of nitrogen or urea, 100 pounds of phosphorus, and 100 pounds of potash, we would end up with a 64, 46, 60.
Yeah, that's the number of units when we combine those three fertilizers together. Now, I know this is probably getting a little bit confusing, but that's why we're doing this video. Try to help you guys understand this a little bit better.
So we've established that macro fertilizers are compounds that have different functions. They also have different characteristics.
And by that we mean these compounds will stabilize themselves in the soil in different ways. For example, nitrogen is a compound that will migrate in the soil. In wet, rainy conditions, nitrogen will move down in the soil column. In dry conditions, nitrogen will migrate to the surface of the soil column.
And nitrogen can and will dissipate over time due to evaporation.
Now, they do make urea that has a protective coating applied to it so that when you broadcast this urea, it gives you some time to work it into the soil so that if it's 95 degrees out, you're not losing your nitrogen before you get around to working it into the soil. Once it's worked into the soil, it will be somewhat protected and covered, and it'll melt down into the soil. But almost immediately, even though it's melted down into the soil, you're going to start losing some of that nitrogen. So it's important to get that nitrogen worked into the soil as soon as possible, especially if it doesn't have that protective coating on it. It's also important not to put that urea on too far in advance. I wouldn't want to apply that 6 months ahead of when I'm planning on planting a crop, because I'm going to lose a considerable amount of that urea or nitrogen to evaporation over that 6-month period of time.
Phosphorus and potassium will stay in a somewhat stationary position in the soil column.
Yeah, they differ from nitrogen in that way. They're a lot more stable in the soil, so they won't dissipate over time like your urea or nitrogen will. With that being said, like any fertilizer, when you remove a crop, say hay or corn or soybeans from that field, you're removing nutrients that plant utilized during the growing and fruiting stage. For instance, if I remove 200 bushels of corn in harvest time off of a cornfield, then I need to replenish those nutrients that 200 bushels of corn used to grow.
So the three main crops that we're going to be covering today is corn, soybeans, and clover and alfalfa being the third. We're also going to be talking about brassicas and turnips, and we'll cover that a little later in the video.
If you're just starting out to food plots, or maybe you've been doing them for a few years, and you haven't ever had any soil samples taken, I highly recommend that you get that done. A lot of times we want to skip those steps, and for a guy that's more familiar with the dirt that he's working and planting in, he may be able to get by a lot better without soil samples. But for you guys that are just starting out, and like myself, I want to make sure that I've got all my T's crossed and my I's dotted. I like to get soil samples. That not only tells me what nutrition or what fertilizers I might be lacking, it gives me a number where my pH is. And some crops like a more acidic soil, other crops might like more alkaline soil. So it's good to know where that pH is. And then, of course, you can add your lime in if necessary, or do whatever it is that you need to do to get that pH at the optimal level. This is a helpful little chart here. If we look at this side over here, it's my understanding that these numbers represent total nutrient removal by stover, straw, plus grain. So in other words, if you were removing corn stalks and the leaves and basically the whole plant from the field, this would be the chart that you would refer to replenish those nutrients that you removed. This side of the chart represents just removal of the grain. So for our purposes, we're going to be looking at this table here, and as it states at the top, nutrient removal rates for selected crops and yield levels, removal pounds per acre. So here's our crop. This column is our yields: nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, magnesium, and sulfur, pounds per acre. The first thing I want to mention is these are not numbers that represent what amount of fertilizer you need to put down for these specific crops. These are numbers that represent what is being removed when you remove these bushels or tonnage, in this case, from a crop field. Now, you could use this chart to determine what you might want to put down. Say, like looking at corn here, if I plan on trying to grow 200 bushel corn, I know it's going to take a minimum of 180 pounds of nitrogen to be put on per acre, and right down the line. So with that being said, these numbers represent what is being removed when these crops are removed. In other words, if I grow 6 tons of alfalfa per acre and I harvest that, I'm going to be removing 306 pounds of N, 72 pounds of phosphorus, 294 pounds of potash, and so on. Don't read this wrong like I did at first. This is not a recommendation of what amount of fertilizer you need to be putting on. It represents what is being removed when you remove these crops. However, as I demonstrated with the corn here, I can use these numbers to determine approximately how much my corn is going to require if I want to hit that 200 bushels to the acre, or soybeans for that matter. Because typically when you're planting alfalfa, just like clover or soybeans, you're not putting any nitrogen on. Very rare instances have I heard of guys using any nitrogen when planting these crops, because alfalfa, clover, soybeans, these plants all fix their own nitrogen into the soil, and they are high in nitrogen when they are harvested, which is represented here. This would be the amount of nitrogen you're removing from the soil. So I'm sure you can see how helpful this little chart is when you're trying to determine what you need to put down for a particular crop.
This is a more complete list of crops. So to get to the pounds per acre that you need to replenish when you remove a crop, you need to multiply the values in this table by the yield to calculate the total nutrients removal. So let's drop down to corn. So if you take this 0.9 and you multiply it by 200 bushel corn per acre, then you would end up with 180 pounds that you need to replenish of nitrogen to that acre. And moving down the line, you can do the same thing with each of these to determine your pounds per acre.
So for you guys that are out there that have planted a lot of turnips or brassicas, if you've planted much of this at all, you probably have realized by now that generally you get your best results the first time you plant a field into turnips or brassicas. And then from there, it's kind of downhill. What I've come to realize is that is due to disease and not necessarily soil depletion of nutrients.
Turnips and brassicas are highly susceptible to disease.
Yeah, these plants are easy to grow, but they are susceptible to several fungal and bacterial infections. So after doing a little bit of research, it's recommended that you wait at least 3 years at a very minimum to plant brassicas or turnips on the same field.
That's going to help prevent the buildup of soil-borne disease and pests.
Yeah, this is really important. It seems like every time I've tried to plant brassicas and turnips 2 consecutive years on the same field, the first ones come out great, and then the second year it kind of barely get by, and then by the third year, if you try doing it 3 years in a row, it's like you wasted all your time. The plants just are unhealthy, a lot of yellow spots on the leaves, and they just look like they don't want to grow. And these are the reasons for this, that disease evidently gets established in the soil and infects the plants when they're young, prevents them from flourishing. So this is where the importance of crop rotation comes in. I'll give you an idea of what I like to do. When I plant a field to brassicas and turnip, I'm already planning ahead like 3-4 years, whenever possible. When I plant those brassicas and turnips in the fall, I like to add in an appropriate amount of clover seed so that the following spring, my brassica and turnips, they're all gone. I end up with a nice stand of clover on that field. Then I'll leave that in clover for 2 years, after which I'll come in and plant corn. Now, some important things to make sure you do along the way. You want to make sure that your clover seed, when you plant that initial brassica and turnip plot and you incorporate the clover seed in there, you want to make sure that clover seed is inoculated. Then that gives it the ability to fix nitrogen into the soil. This will be later utilized by the corn crop that we're going to plant in a few years. Then when it's time to plant that corn, I would like to disc that field of clover in when that clover is nice and tall and green and lush. By incorporating that into the soil, this is called green manure. This is adding a substantial amount of organic matter as well as nitrogen into the soil on top of the clover plants that have been fixing the nitrogen into the soil for the past 2 years. The end result is you're going to end up with less urea costs when you're getting ready to put that corn seed in the ground. It's going to contribute to the overall health of your soil. On my brassica and turnip plots, I've been putting down 100 to 175 pounds of nitrogen, 100 pounds of phosphorus, and 150 pounds to 175 pounds of potassium. And the reason for the fluctuations depends on my soil samples, what they tell me I need, but this is kind of estimation of what it takes to grow these specific food plot crops. On the brassicas and turnips, a lot of guys will go lower on nitrogen. Myself personally, I've seen a big difference in adding that extra nitrogen on those brassica and turnip plots. They just seem to put on more tops, which in our area, the actual bulbs of the turnips, the deer do use them, but they seem to eat those tops a lot more than they focus on the bulbs of the turnips. So that's the reason why I put that extra nitrogen. I want more tonnage on the leafy growth of those brassicas and turnips. What I'd like to point out on this chart here is when you look at alfalfa and this alsite clover, they both call for or utilize very similar amounts of each of the different nutrients, so there's not much difference in what they require when it comes to alfalfa and clover. If we go over here to red clover, again, very similar numbers in comparison to the alsite clover and alfalfa. There is no white clover on this chart, but after doing some research, I can tell you that it's right in there with these as well. So all of your clovers and alfalfas are going to require a really close to the same amount of P and K. As a maintenance application on my alfalfa and clover plots, I've been putting down yearly 100 pounds of phosphorus and 150 to 175 pounds of potassium per acre.
Alright, so that wraps it up. Hopefully you guys find this information helpful. As always, we appreciate you watching, and remember, hard work is more reliable than luck.